All right, we're back. Talk 99.5. This is the line. We're holding the line, and we have someone on the line. A lot of lines. I am filling in Brian Dawson, CEO of 1819 News, for the great Andrew McLean on Talk 99.5. We are on the final approach. If you've ever been on a long flight and you're coming in to make a landing, that's us. We're in the last hour of this 4-hour extravaganza. And we had someone online. They're not on the line anymore. They disappeared. And so with that, I want to talk a little bit about right now Trump is addressing the country at this Faith and Freedom Coalition, and he's talking about the importance of Christianity in America. And I really want to emphasize that and talk a little bit about um, my thoughts that it's more than it being this influence on America. It is the founding ethos of America. What is an ethos? It's the things that we as a culture and a society and a civilization we agree upon these things. We have a Christian ethos. What God says is good in our civilization, we agree with Him, and our laws reflect that we think this is good. Therefore, God says it's good. So we as a nation say it's good, and the things that God says are bad, we as a nation say is bad. And so our ethos was shaped and founded and comes out of Christianity, and you can really get back into, our legal system is rooted in the Bible. What do I mean by that? Well, you have this concept called general equity, where um, you're pulling the wisdom from Israel's civil code. I'm not talking about the nation state of Israel that exists in the Middle East right now under Bibi Netanyahu. I'm talking about biblical Israel in God's covenant people in the Old Testament. Um, their Mosaic laws that they use to govern Israel. Each of those laws has a principle in it, and when you draw what's called the general equity of that principle and apply it to your current society and civilization, which King Alfred the Great did when he became King of England. He started as the King of Wessex and ascended to be the King of all England as he fought off the Danes and did amazing things. You got to read the book White Horse King by Ben Merkle to really get a taste and a feel for everything that he did. But one of the things he did is that he pulled the general equity out of Israel's civil code and created what's called English common law. And English common law, is interpreted by William Blackstone, is how we created our legal system here in America. So people who say that we're not a Christian nation, that is retarded. Okay, it is absolutely stupid and foolish to think those type of thoughts. And I want to just talk real briefly about um, what is the culture war. What is the culture war? And it matters much as we think about this idea of the culture war is a battle for the ethos of the nation and about what we believe. What is our society rooted in? And we have had a Christian civilization, and I'm going to go back kind of to when Christ rose from the grave. Okay, he rose. Christ rose from the grave, showed himself to over 500 people. He ascended into heaven where he's seated at the right hand of the Father, righteously ruling over all things right now. Okay, he says, all authority in heaven on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to obey all that I have commanded. Jesus also says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. So, this kind of modern form of Christianity that doesn't equate being a believer with obeying, that's insanity. Jesus says, if you love me, you will obey my commandments. What is discipleship and evangelism? Well, that's to say that Christ is Lord of all creation. When he died, he not only purchased the ability for lost sinners to be reconciled to their king, him and his father. Um, he not only did that, but he also purchased all of creation. He restored all of creation, began the restoration process of all creation with his own blood. He purchased everything with his blood, and so therefore it belongs to him, and he is Lord over all of it. And that's why he says, after he's risen from the grave, after he paid the price, after he ascended into heaven, says that he's seated at the right hand of the Father. And he's seated at the right hand of the Father because he is ruling over all of creation. And it says that all authority in heaven on earth has been given to me, Christ says. go and disciple the nations and teach them to obey. Okay, so that's not something you'll hear in many pulpits is this concept. And so, not too long after Christ rose from the dead and ascended into heaven and was seated at the right hand of the Father, there was what was called the dispersion. And so what came in was the destruction of Jerusalem and the dispersion. And all these people who had converted to Christianity ended up being dispersed, and they moved north and west in the dispersion and into the Roman Empire. And within a few hundred years, Christianity became the prevailing, the official religion of the Roman Empire. Okay, and from there, Christianity went on into Europe and became the official religion of Europe, and this is what sprang out what is called Christendom. And a lot of times we use interchangeably the concept of Western civilization and Christendom. Well, what does Christendom mean? What is Christendom? Christendom is where Christ has dominion. And what that means is that dominion, that means that he's ruling and reigning in these lands. There was Christian kings with Christian laws, the music, all of these things, the music, the art, the architecture that we still marvel at today. It was all committed to the glory of Christ. Everything that was done for that purpose. And the um, that and then what came from that, and these European Christian kingdoms, you had the Reformation, all these other things. I'm not going to get into that, but so it goes from a few people in Jerusalem to spreading into the Roman Empire and becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire, and then moving farther north and west into Europe and creating Christendom. And then from there, um, men and families crossed this massive ocean in wooden ships and planted the flag of Christ on this continent. And how do we know that that's what they did? Well, the Mayflower Compact, it says that the purpose, why did they cross this ocean and risk their life? It says for the glory of God and the expansion of his kingdom. Okay. So these people risked everything to get in a wooden boat and cross this huge body of water to plant the flag of Christ on this continent. Okay. And began the founding of America. And you go back to our founders and what they believed and what they fought for. Okay. And then we ended up creating colonies. And what were these colonies? These colonies were when the Mayflower lands and any other boat landed, the first thing they did was they created Christian homes, and then they created a church, and then a school, and so then they had to have a government that governed over this little community, this little colony, and then that happened over and over and over again until you had the official formed colonies, and the outworking of these Christian colonies was hospitals and all these other beautiful things, and these institutions of higher learning that were called Hoover, Princeton, Yale, or Hoover, Harvard, excuse me, Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. Um, and those were Christian institutions that were dedicated to the glory of Christ and his kingdom. Okay, you can go back and look at the original charters of these major universities, these Ivy League universities that were created by Puritans and people who were steeped in Christianity and created these centers of education for classical Christian education at its peak was the reason these universities were created. Okay, and so now you think about what's essentially happened. Well, this war that we're in right now, this war, you can call it communism, Bolshevism, atheism, secular humanism, all of it. It's the same exact ideology. And what it is, it's an antichrist ideology that seeks to destroy Christ's civilization on earth. Okay. And so what does this mean? Well, our kingdom is not of this world, bro. I have a shirt that says NOTW. And what that means is kingdom's not of this world, bro. Okay, yeah, well, it's not of this world, but it's invading this world through his people, his covenant people that he enters into covenant through baptism, and then the creation of families, churches, and nations, and states, and cities, and counties that are setting up their governance in accordance with his will on this earth. That's Christ's kingdom on this earth. That's why it was called Christendom, where Christ has dominion. Wherever Christ is being obeyed covenantally in homes, in churches, and in governments, wherever Christ is being obeyed in those covenant spheres is his kingdom on this earth. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What does that mean? Well, Christ is perfectly obeyed in heaven, And so one day every knee will bow and every tongue confess on earth. Okay, so we will have perfect obedience like it is in heaven on this earth once every knee bows and every tongue confesses Christ as Lord. And that's a long way off. This is going to come to a shock to a lot of modern evangelicals that are waiting for Jesus to come back next Tuesday and rapture us. Okay, that is not a biblical, historical Christian concept. The rapture has never been found until the 1830s in the Schofield Bible and this new form of dispensationalism. And so, this Christian civilization and the United States of America is the peak. It's the crown jewel of Christendom. It's the crown jewel of Christian and Western civilization is the United States of America. And so if, let's do a Paul Harvey experiment here. If I were the devil, okay, or C.S. Lewis wrote in the Screw Tape Letters, it's this idea of sitting. If you understand that Satan is not omnipotent, he's not all powerful like God, he's not omniscient, he's not all knowing like God, okay, and he's not omnipresent, he's not everywhere like God. He has limited resources in order to fight this fight against King Jesus. And his fight, he can't kill King Jesus. He tried to do that already, and he rose from the dead. And so now the fight is against Christ's people in his kingdom on earth. And so the war is against Christian civilization. And so let me show you that by going to actually we'll hit a break, and I want to show you basically the kind of the birth of this war that we're going through right now. And Donald Trump has said he's been waiting his whole life to go to war with communism. And I'm going to unpack what that means from this worldview that I'm laying out when we come back from this break. So we're going to hit a break, talk 99.5, more on that when we come back. All right, we're back from the break. Talk 99.5. This is The Line. Brian Dawson, CEO of 1819 News, filling in for the Andrew McLean a little bit longer until the top of the hour. So, getting back to kind of tee it up. So, Donald Trump is speaking at the Faith and Family Coalition, and he is talking about the deep Christian history of our nation. And then he went from there to talking about defeating communism. And so I am going on kind of a long stream of consciousness to show you, to connect the dots on what he's talking about. Okay. And so in the previous segment, if you didn't listen and are just now tuning in, I outlined how essentially Christianity went from the resurrection to becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire and going into Europe, and then from Europe to planting the flag of Christ on this continent and the colonies, and then the greatest nation that's ever existed and the crown jewel of Christendom and Western civilization is America because we are steeped in Christianity. All of the West is Christ's kingdom. Christ's kingdom is wherever his rule is made known through covenant institutions of family, churches, and states, counties, cities, and nations. Wherever those nations, cities, counties, states, families, churches are obeying, Christ's kingdom is made known on this earth, and that's called Christendom, where Christ has dominion. And the West is uniquely Christian compared to any other place on earth, because we set our nation up in accordance and in covenant with Him, that we would obey Him. Our nation would obey, our state would obey, our cities and our counties would obey, our families would obey, our churches would be faithful, covenantally faithful. And so the war, as I said, is the war of Satan and his minions against the kingdom of Christ. He can't get Jesus, and so he's going after Christ's seed. Okay, and Christ's seed is the many brothers. And I'm not going to get all the theology and scripture. I could be here for hours. But ultimately, it's those of us who are obeying. Those are the ones that Satan is at war with, and you see that. And we're going to go back to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917. Even Russia was Christian. You had a Christian monarch in Russia for 400 years under the Romanov dynasty. And so it was Romanov monarchs. They were the czars. And Russia was a Christian nation under the czars. And the Bolsheviks revolted against that. The Bolsheviks, inspired by Satan, okay, they are his minions, and that same revolutionary spirit and ideology, that egalitarian Marxism that fueled the Bolsheviks to revolt against Russia, where they went in and revolted against the czars who'd been there for 400 years. And they went and kidnapped, they defeated the czars and kidnapped Tsar Nicholas and his wife and his children, and ultimately came in and shot them and stabbed them to death and buried them in a shallow grave outside of town, and turned Christian Russia into communist Soviet Russia. That's what the Bolsheviks did, and they tried to move west by tank, plane, and traditional warfare, and they were unable to do so. The West couldn't be beat that way, and they said the West's culture and their ethos is so Christian, we can't penetrate the West through tanks, planes, and traditional warfare. And so Alexander Gramsci, Herbert Marcuse, the Frankfurt School came up with the idea of we have to destroy the West through culture. And so they began infiltrating our culture shaping institutions. That's media and entertainment. That's our legal system. We talked about that with Chad Jackson, what civil rights really was. That was this, okay? It was undermining our nation through what looked like a good thing, but it was really Marxist, revolutionary, egalitarian communism uprooting our legal system and using it against us. It's media and entertainment. It's the law. It's education. That's where we see it probably the most, as our education institutions have been hijacked. But ultimately, this war, all of these things that we see in the culture war, though, the fruits of the culture war, are enemies against, is a war against our civilization. And if you're strategic, as Satan is, as his minions are, in trying to defeat our civilization, you have to go to the foundation of Christian civilization, and that's the formation and flourishing of Christian families. That's where it all starts. Two Christians getting married and having Christian children, and enculturating their children into the Christian faith through this concept called paideia, which is found in Ephesians 6:4. Train your children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, the nurture and admonition of the Lord. That word nurture and instruction is translated to paideia. There's really no English translation for the word paideia, but it's a full-orbed enculturation into the Christian faith. You're making citizens of the Christian commonwealth through this process of paideia. And so what that is, That is the fountain of Christian civilization is Christ, His Word, His covenant, and His families. Those families are the nuclear power plant that fuels Christian civilization on Earth. And so, what you see in the culture war is a war against the formation and flourishing of Christian families. Think about the different things that we see in the culture war. It's about stopping that, the formation and flourishing, and families forming, having children, marriages happening, having Christian children, and then teaching them the faith, and bringing them into our Western heritage. The war is against that. What is abortion? Okay, what is homosexuality? What is birth control? What is all of these things that we see? Transgenderism, mass promiscuity that came from birth control, and all these other things. It's getting away from the nuclear power plant of Christian civilization. All these things that we're fighting in the culture war, the enemy has waged war on the ability for Christians to be able to form families, and those families to flourish through generations, by coming in and disrupting our culture and getting us away from marrying and having children and teaching them the faith. Okay, the radical indoctrination of our education system. That's exactly what that is. Wanting to rip Christian children from their Christian homes. The left doesn't reproduce in the bedroom; they reproduce in the classroom. The left is not having children. Liberals are not having children. They're liberal couples, leftist couples. They're reproducing at like zero point 0.8 children per couple, where Christians are at replacement rate of 2.3 or higher. Yet the left is growing and we're shrinking. Why? Because they're stealing our children's heart, minds, and souls through these educational institutions. So this is part of the plan to destroy the Christian family. The generational faithfulness that is the foundation of Christian civilization is that family. And so that is what is being destroyed. And so people always ask me, Brian, what can I do? What can I do? How can I be part of what 1819 News is doing? How can I fight back? How can I do this? How can I do that? And everyone has this grandiose plan of jumping out of a helicopter and, with a belt-fed machine gun shooting communists. That's not it. The way that you fight back, I'll let Charlie Kirk say it. See if I can find him here. Charlie Kirk's advice to young men who were searching for purpose and returning to the faith was to get married, have some children, have more children than you can afford, take your faith seriously, and train your children to do the same. So he understood that the way to restore our nation was to start with a building block, the Christian family, okay? Charlie Kirk understood that, and what he's saying is the way that we fight back, we have this idea that if we can just do this or if we could just do that. No, if men would get back into historic Christian churches, specifically, I would say historic Protestantism, form families, get married, have as many children as the Lord would allow, and teach your children about the faith and hand the Western traditions down to them. We do this in mass over 40 to 70 years, and we win. We're talking more about education when we come back from this break. Talk 99.5. We'll be back. All right, we're back. Talk 99.5, The Line, Brian Dawson filling in for Andrew McLean. This is it. This is the last 30 minutes, guys. We'll have one commercial break and then another segment, and we'll be out of here. I'll be out of here. And who's going to be coming on next to fill in for Leland Live? Well, that would be April Marie Fogel, an employee of 1819 News as well. And she is the director of the Center for Education. And so I'm on the heels of this kind of stream of consciousness diatribe I went on about the war for Christian civilization, and that the war is the hottest around the forming and flourishing of Christian families, and the way that the faith is handed down is through the education system. And the education system has been hijacked, as have our churches and seminaries. Okay, Marxism has infiltrated our churches and seminaries. Communism, Bolshevism, atheism, whatever you want to call it, has infiltrated our churches and seminaries. But most of all, we see it most evident in the realm of education, and that's why we have created the Center for Education that April Marie Fogel is the director of, and it's full-time dedicated investigative journalism into our education system. That's the Alabama Education Association, our K through 12 schools, the perverts and the weirdos, and the curriculum, and all the critical race theory and the LGBTQ stuff. All of that stuff, we're going whole hog into investigating and exposing that stuff. It's the Education Trust Fund, the waste, fraud, and abuse that goes on in education spending. It's Steve Marshall, our Attorney General, gives us credit for school choice getting across the finish line. 1819 News being responsible for that. There's like 49,000 students that are enrolled in that. It's $350 million going to 49,000 students who are getting an education they couldn't have gotten without school choice. And 1819 News is credited by a lot of our officials for getting school choice across the line. Lots of people played a part in that, but 1819 News was the gust of wind that pushed that, that filled the sails that pushed it across the finish line after 12 years of trying to get that done. Just through pointing out how the Alabama Education Association is infiltrating the Republican Party. I've talked about that a lot, as well as just the stranglehold that they have on Republican legislators on doing stuff like school choice that are actually going to improve our schools. And so this idea of handing down our faith and our way of life it's called pedagogy. It's pedagogical systems. It's the systems of education. But we're not only focused on K through 12, we're also focused on higher ed. We know that even here in Ruby Red, Alabama, we have universities that have been completely hijacked by these Marxists and these communists and these people who hate Christ and hate our values and our way of life. And so we're digging in and we're highlighting it and we're bringing these stories to you of what's going on in these campuses, that we're entrusting the hearts, minds, and souls of our children. The most valuable thing that we have is our children. We're entrusting them to these institutions, and these institutions are filled with communists that want to deconstruct your children's faith and teach them values that are antithetical to the values that they were raised in their home with. So if they survive the public education system, which is like not great survival rates, then we send them to these universities where there really is no hope. And so anybody who's made it through a public school, 12 years of public school and another 4 years into one of these universities, and they stayed conservative and Christian, that's a true miracle. Okay. But it doesn't have to be that way. And so what we're committed to doing is bringing our institutions of education, be it K through 12 or higher ed, we're bringing them to heal. And the thing is, the people at the tops of many of these universities in our state want to see a return to sanity on their campuses, but they, my gut is that they don't feel that they can. The left has, through accreditation, through funding, through all of these different things, they have a ton of power, and a lot of these universities are in a position where they can't do anything, even though they desire to. So what we're trying to do is come in and reveal these things so that people can see how bad it really is, and that there's a consensus and an outcry to make changes. And we're already seeing that. There was legislation that was passed this last session. Lots of really great education legislation, by the way, was passed as a direct result of April Marie's work and Craig Monger's work and the Center for Education's work and 1819's work on the realm of education. But the one I want to talk about, I think it was HB 580 by Troy Stubbs, the state rep there in Wetumpka, where I live, passed legislation that essentially is forcing these universities to dissolve their faculty senates. And these faculty senates is the kind of the board of governance of these radical educators who are choosing curriculum and all these different things going on in the universities. And the boards of trustees don't have the authority and the power to get rid of some of these crazy professors because they're tenured. They don't have the power to change and comb through the curriculum because that's being done by the faculty senate. Well, HB 580 makes it to where these faculty senates are dissolved, and the board of trustees basically gets that power back. The inmates will no longer be running the asylum is essentially what's happening at these universities, and it's a direct result because of April Marie Fogel and Craig Monger's reporting, and April Marie Fogel's leadership at the Center for Education, 1819 News' Center for Education. And there was some questions on whether Auburn and Alabama were going to be affected by this legislation because they're constitutionally established universities. When the state was founded, it was founded with Auburn and Alabama, and so legislation hitting them is a little bit more challenging. And so they had some wiggle room that they could have toyed with. But all the other universities, Troy, South Alabama, West Alabama, North Alabama, all these other universities in the state are going to have to obey this legislation by October 1st, and they have to dissolve their faculty senates. And this is a huge thing, okay? This is a huge thing for reining in these institutions that have the potential to do tremendous good for our state, that have been hijacked by people who have values that are antithetical to the majority of the people in the state, okay? They're being brought to heel through our work, the work of the legislature, and the boards of trustees. I'm assuming that they're favorable to this. And what we saw at Auburn, not only did they have wiggle room with them being constitutionally established, but they could have waited until October to do it, but they acted first. And so what that tells me, what that communicates to me, is that Auburn University has a desire to see change as it pertains to woke nonsense and curriculum and professors and wicked ideology that's being forced down students' throats. I mean, the amount of text messages I get from Auburn students and that our journalists get from Auburn students and Auburn faculty where this stuff is being taught on a regular basis. It's not just Auburn, it's every university. But Auburn has actually made the first move to start to bring some of this under control. And to me, I'm an Alabama fan when it comes to football, but Auburn to me is the crown jewel of the state. Okay, this is Alabama has a majority of out of state, out of country students there. It's this massive university, but more than 50%, it's probably closer to 60%, if I had to guess, is from out of state and out of country. Okay. And a lot of the people that go to the University of Alabama graduate and then they leave and go to New York or leave and go to some other state. Auburn is a majority of in state students, and those students typically stay in our economy and in our state. And so Auburn has the most influence over the future of our state. And it's so good to see that they're taking this threat seriously, this problem seriously, and that they're doing the things that they need to do to be able to rein this in so that they can not only be the crown jewel of Alabama, but they could be the most conservative university in the country that is a state university that's not a Hillsdale or something like that, right? And so seeing them make these moves is big. I think you're going to see, with HB 580, you're going to be able to see the removal of tenured professors with cause. And so there'll be, I guess, what would be like a tribunal or a trial or something like that. When we see some of these woke violations that go against the law that continue to be happening on these universities, despite the Trump administration saying it can't happen here, well, it continues to happen here. And these tenured professors think that they're untouchable. This legislation makes it to where they are indeed touchable, which is a weird thing to say when we're talking about what we're talking about. But point being, these changes are coming, okay? And these changes are coming as a direct result of the work of 1819 News, the direct result of the Center for Education directed by April Marie Fogel, who's going to be coming on to fill in for Leland, okay? That's the work that we're doing. That's the impact that we're having. And God bless the people at Auburn who are helping to bring this woke stuff under control. Auburn is really the only university in the state that I would send any of my children to. My son plans to go to Auburn. And I could not be more proud of the moves that they're making, which is a direct response to our reporting. And Auburn was the first. They're setting the precedent. The University of Alabama is going to have to follow them, or have an insane amount of pressure put on them from them not following, which I don't think that they can stand. And then, legislatively required is the rest of the universities in the state are going to have to dissolve their faculty senates and get on board with this same exact type of stuff that you're seeing Auburn University do now, which is incredible. When you start thinking about real generational change, real generational victories, that can't happen without your pedagogical systems, your universities, your schools, actually teaching the values that you want to see the people of your state possess. Those values they're formed in the home, but they're also formed in these schools. And so it's imperative that we do this work, that we investigate these schools, that they're operating the way that they should, and that they're actually teaching the future, taxpayers and the citizens of our state, an education that actually reflects what we want them to have in Alabama. So There it is, the Center for Education. If you'd like to learn more about that and support us, reach out. And in order, it costs money to have full-time investigative journalists dedicated into digging into the education system. Okay, and so if you'd like to financially support the work we're doing, we're a 501c3, we're a not-for-profit. Donations are tax deductible and anonymous. We'd love to talk to you about that, so that you can be part of saving the state of Alabama, but not only saving and preserving, but advancing our way of life in this state for years to come. With that, we're going to hit a break. Talk 99.5. This is The Line. We'll be back. All right, we're back. Talk 99.5. This is The Line. Brian Dawson, CEO of 1819 News, filling in for Andrew McLean. This is my last segment, guys. This is it until the next time I get to fill in. If I ever get to fill in again, I don't know. I'm a controversial guy. You never know what's going to happen, but you'll be hearing from some 1819 News folks either way. But I want to just kind of leave some parting thoughts on the table. If you've been listening to my 2 days on the air, one theme is consistent throughout, and it's the reason, so on one hand, 1819 News is a statewide, state-focused news and multimedia empire with the express purpose of taking out AL.com as a media outlet of record in the state of Alabama. There's that. But more than anything, we're actually a Christian ministry that's dedicated to the preservation and advancement of our civilization and our way of life, Christ's kingdom. Okay, that's what we are. We are at war with those who seek to subvert our nation and destroy our way of life, be it communists, be it Muslims, be it radical LGBTQ psychopaths. Okay, any of those civilizational enemies who have waged war on us, we said we see that, and we'll be your Huckleberry. That's what 1819 News is. Okay, and we use media as a tool to do that, and we use media because it's real journalism. Okay, we have a firewall between me and the fundraising team and the journalist team. Our journalists don't know who our donors are. They're out there creating news, reporting on what's going on in the state, and it's not influenced by the money that's coming in. Okay, there's no other news organization that has that firewall that used to exist in all journalistic institutions. That's one of the things that makes us unique among many. The fact that we have an editor in chief, a managing editor, and an evening editor, as well as 5 reporters, 2 dedicated investigative journalists, and stringers. Who else is doing that? Okay, that's the reason that we have exploded in 4.5 years and become the preeminent news organization. We might not be the media outlet of record. We might not have the clicks and the views or whatever that AL.com has reporting on this transgender thing or that, or sports and crime. But as it pertains to news that's talking about what's actually going on in the state, and why it matters, we are the preeminent news organization. And the reason that we were able to do that in such a short amount of time is we're committed to doing journalism well. And it's because we have a bunch of Christians that everything we do for the glory of Christ. And so that shows up in the way that we do things. That doesn't mean we're going to browbeat you with Christianity in our news organization. We're not a Christian news organization. We're a news organization that happens to be ran by a bunch of people who share that faith, Catholics and Protestants. So with that, this civilizational war that we're in, I want to say this is the one thing, and I kind of got to it before I went into my education rant, is that how do we fight back? Like I said, everybody wants to jump out of a helicopter with a belt-fed machine gun and shoot communists. That's not the war. That's not the fight. What is the fight? Well, the fight is, like I said, Charlie Kirk says it. Get married, go to church, have more children than you can afford, okay? And teach your children about Christ, enculturate them into the Christian faith. Make sure that they know Jesus Christ and that they know about their Western heritage and the tradition of this civilization, and that they are going to be part of it when they get old. That's how we win. Every father who gets up at 4:30 in the morning every morning and gets in his truck to go to work and works through thorns and thistles in the sweat of his brow to be able to provide and put food on the plate for his family, that person is saving this civilization. That person is doing the Lord's work. Every mother, okay, who has it in their ability to put their children above a career and their families above a career, and dies to self and sees that nurturing eternal souls is more important than working in a cubicle. Okay, women who do that, and any woman, no matter their circumstance in life, prioritizing their children in their home, every diaper changed, every sleepless night, every baby nursed, that is waging war against the forces of darkness. Okay, when we do that, that is how we win. And again, if we would just do that as a people, and we would see to it, and we understand that that is the foundation, that is the nuclear power plant of Christian civilization, is families forming, families flourishing, and being generationally faithful to hand down the faith and our way of life and our heritage to the next generation. If we would do that for the next 40 to 70 years, we win. And so that's why there's a war against us doing that. That's why pornography is such a big thing. That's the reason, promiscuity is so high. That's the reason that LGBTQIA plus transgender psychopaths are waging war. They want to destroy the ability for Christian families to form, flourish, and hand down the faith generationally. That is what the war is against, because if they can stop that, they can deracinate our culture completely. They can cut us off, and then they can destroy us. Okay? Yes, we have to get rid of the Muslims in Alabama. Yes, we have to get rid of, stop the Islamification. That's a better way of saying it, I think. Stopping the Islamification of Alabama and America. Yes, we have to stop the communist subversion of our institutions. All of those things. But if we win laterally, if we win right now, and we don't hand down the faith and our way of life to the next generation, we lose again. We're just in the same situation in the next 20 or 30 years. We may get a bunch of big wins, and we just got a bunch of huge political wins with the elections that we've seen, okay? And the legislation that got passed this last legislative session has been unlike anything I've seen since I've lived in Alabama for 12 years, okay? We're getting these huge wins, but if we don't win generationally, we don't win. And so Christians have to think generationally. We can't think laterally, we have to think generationally. One of the most important things that I think I get to do, yes, I have 7 children. I love my wife and I train my children. We give them a thoroughly Christian education. We're handing down our faith and our way of life to them. But there's these Gen Z young men out there, for me particularly. I'm not going to be discipling young women. I think my wife would not appreciate that. But these young Gen Z men who are completely disenfranchised, they don't feel like they can afford to get married. They don't feel like they can afford to have children. They don't feel like they can afford to buy a home. They're listening to Nick Fuentes, okay? They're listening to all this stuff and they're pissed off and they're angry and they have every right to be pissed off and angry. We've completely failed them. Specifically, I'll just say the generations above millennials, but millennials have done our part too. They have this burden laying in their lap, and they're easy ground to be radicalized. But they're also tremendous. They are the fields that are white for harvest. To go out and speak to these young men and show them the Christian faith, and show them about being a husband, show them about being a father, show them about hard work, and building something and owning something. And that's what they want. They want older men to show them how to live, not the boomers that are like, listen here, I built myself up by the bootstraps. I bought my house for cash when I was, back when I was your age, and it was like a $17,000 house that was 10,000 square feet. Okay, that's not the current situation. That's not what they're looking for. But these young men on these university campuses, that's one of the reasons I love Turning Point and how I got into doing the stuff I do with Turning Point, is that I had one of my donors challenge me, said, what are you doing for the next generation, Brian? And at the time, it was nothing other than my family. And I've really fallen in love with the ability to reach some of these young right wing men and get them from black pilling and despondency, and showing them the hope that can be found in Christ, and living in covenant faithfulness to Him in every area of their life. That is how we win, guys. That is it. It's a generational vision, beginning with your family and your community first, and working out from there. That's how we win. And that is why it's so hard to do those things, is because that is how we win. If we won some other way, it would be hard to do those things. But it's really easy to fall into despair. The world, the flesh, and the devil are at war against us, and because of that, the world and the flesh and the devil are going to want to keep us from doing those basic building blocks of civilization. So with that, I'm sure the music is about to bubble up in my ears and will probably end up cutting me off from this stream of consciousness that I'm enjoying so thoroughly. But I've enjoyed my 8 hours I've got to spend with you guys the last couple days. I'm sure I'll be back. Don't know when. Thank you for tuning in. Again, this is Talk 99.5, The Line. Subscribe at 1819news.com. Can't forget that. And follow my podcast. All right. Next up.